you know that your power meter could lie to you? Taylor, tell us what that's all about.
Corrupt data is the enemy of the power-based cyclist. You can use tools like Training Peaks and WKO4 to find those bad power spikes, particularly if you're using something like a left-sided power meter. Justin, don't you have a left-sided power meter?
Why, yes, I do. And if you have a left-sided power meter, there's a nugget of information you definitely need to know. So watch the show to find out what it is.
Throwing back and forth. Webb has to catch that wheel. How much does he have left in the tank? His heart rate is definitely going up, but this guy can put down some watts. His watts per kilo is fabulous. We are coming into the close of this race. Justin Wagner sitting on the wheel of his rival now. Adam Webb coming around, jumps on the wheel of Adam Boyko. They are starting to ramp it up, but Wagner goes 12.0 watts per kilo. Webb jumps on his tail here. We are seeing exciting stuff happening here as they come to the end here. Big finishes as they lock in here. We see this amazing view. Webb trying to catch on. He is closing the gap on Wagner. Wagner all out. Can he do it? Can he come up to this line? Webb on the tail. He's coming up. Wagner, it looks like he made, yes, and he passes him. Webb takes it from him at the end. Unreal. What an amazing finish. The king dethroned.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I'm Justin Wagner, and this is another episode of What's Up with Power, where we teach you the basics of power-based training so you can take your training to the next level. We have an awesome guest presenter today. You're familiar with him. He's been on the show many times, and he always provides awesome content. Mr. Nate Dunn from Data Driven Athlete. We got him waiting in. He's warming up, getting his vocal cords all ready, doing some stretches. We'll let him keep warming up while we got the group ride queuing up to go off in 30 seconds here in Zwift. So if you haven't joined that yet, feel free to do so. We'll be riding together at a nice pace as we listen to a presentation from Nate. So I'm going to bring Nate on screen. Are you done doing push-ups and warm-ups, and are you presentable, Nate?
Oh, I'm done. Yeah, just topped off my trainer, and I'm ready for the whistle here. So
okay, there we go. We've got Nate on the screen, and take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks again for having me on this morning, Justin. And today we're going to be talking about using power in your workouts, and we're going to reflect a little bit on a couple of another presentation that we had a couple of weeks ago, and we'll talk about that. So this presentation assumes a little bit of kind of progressive knowledge from the last ones. And if any of the things that we're talking about kind of don't make sense, or you feel like we're jumping ahead of you a little bit, make sure to jot down that question. You can leave it in the Facebook box, and we'll try and leave time at the end to cover any questions that you have. So let's jump right into the next slide, please. So first off, I kind of wanted to make this point here at the start that training with power is not about constantly staring at power. So I think oftentimes if you've recently purchased a power meter and you're starting to get into kind of how to use power in your workouts, you might feel this pressure that, I have a power meter, and training with power means I'm always looking at my power. And we want to start off, this presentation by making the case that that's really not what training with power is about. We want you to always record your power, and, it's important to, keep track of all that data because we can use it afterwards. For kind of post-ride analysis and longer-term perspective, but it doesn't mean that you're always looking at it, even in your workout. So we want to talk also about kind of developing a different relationship with power, and that is to go away from it sometimes, and then to come back to it. And kind of that same concept of distance makes the heart grow fonder. We're going to talk about that when it comes to training with power on your bike, and that it helps you appreciate it more and more fully utilize it when you push it aside sometimes. So we're going to jump into what that looks like with the next slide. So this kind of demonstrates a continuum here of the more time that we spend kind of exclusively looking at power or utilizing power-based workouts, we always want to balance that with also doing rides that are based off RPE. So for those of you that don't know, RPE is an acronym for rate of perceived exertion. So this is the continuum of completely subjective intensity or a subjective measure of intensity in RPE, and then a completely objective measure of intensity in power. So we want to explore kind of this whole this whole continuum of these different methods of understanding intensity and how to use that in a workout. So next slide, please. So this kind of demonstrates a little bit of what this continuum might look like for two different athletes. So all the way over on the RPE side of the continuum, we have maybe an athlete that has been training for a long time. Maybe they also have a lot of time to train. And in that case, maybe they're really only utilizing specific power-based goals in their workouts, maybe only 25% of the time. And the rest of their riding, they're utilizing RPE. So that might be, a long 3-hour ride in the hills, or, something like a 4,000 kilojoule ride. So maybe they're still using power in some context, but they're not using it specifically kind of staring at their screen to drive their workout. So that's kind of over on the RPE side of the continuum. And then maybe on the other side of power, you have maybe a newer athlete, maybe somebody who has a really limited amount of time to train. And maybe for them, 75% of their workouts are really driven by power-based goals. But they're still getting some of that balance of some RPE workouts as well. So this kind of demonstrates exactly what this continuum might look like, and it really depends on your athletic history or your training history on the bike, how long you've been riding, how much time you have, also your own personality in terms of how you how you engage with power and data, and whether or not that's either really distracting to you or whether or not it's really motivating to you. So there's no right answer along this continuum. The journey of training is really understanding what where on this continuum really meets your needs and helps you remain more consistent on the bike. So next slide, please. So we're going to assume a couple things before we jump in and kind of look at how to utilize power in your workouts. First of all, you're working on this relationship with your power. You're not just jumping in and saying, I'm going to look at power all the time. I'm always doing power-based workouts. I've never found that that's sustainable for most athletes. They might have a lot of enthusiasm for using power as a guide in their workouts for a month, a couple months. Usually that wanes off. So we're going to assume that you're working on that relationship, and also that you're committed to kind of utilizing focused intervals sparingly. So you can go back to a previous presentation. You can find it on YouTube that we did here with What's Up with Power. You bought a power meter, now what? And this presentation really kind of describes how to set up your Garmin, how to utilize power, but for getting further into those details of making sure that power or your device isn't controlling you on the bike, and you're still kind of in control of that. So with those things in mind, let's hop to the next one. So before we start off here, a lot of you here on Zwift, you understand this intuitively, that really it demands, training with power really demands two different perspectives when it comes to indoor riding or to outdoor riding. And my basic philosophy is that, it's best to probably establish your FTP. If you're riding outdoors and indoors kind of equally, it's best to establish your FTP using an outdoor test, just to simply maintain a consistent TSS across your workout. So again, if some of these acronyms and whatnot aren't making sense, we can address some of those questions afterwards. But in general, I think it's helpful to look at these with two different perspectives, and set your FTP or set your primary training levels using outdoor based tests, and then begin to develop and understand what those levels mean when you're inside, indoors, maybe with less cooling from a fan and all that kind of stuff. So, but it's important that these don't just flop back and forth seamlessly. They require some interpretation, and they're different for each person. So it's important to kind of make note of that. Next slide, please. So another note as we start here, this book in Training and Racing with the Power Meter, where we're getting a lot of our content for this series, talks about kind of this concept of learning or understanding when to stop intervals. So in the book, it describes a system, kind of a power drop-off system, that essentially says, if you're unable to maintain a certain level of intensity by the third interval, this is when you should drop off. So a lot of coaches, if you have Taylor on, he might have a different perspective on this. So a lot of coaches kind of buy into the system of this is a great, utilizing power in your workouts is a great way of knowing when to stop or when to continue to push. And for me personally, I don't think that this is a good idea. And the primary reason is, I think what happens is that oftentimes athletes, it introduces this conversation of quitting in a workout, and they're always kind of trying to gauge, do I feel good? Do I not feel good? How many % off am I from my interval target? And I've found a lot more success in just saying, when you get to that point in a workout where you're really questioning or you feel like your interval targets are kind of off, I would much rather you just simply switch to another screen on your Garmin, transition to RPE, rate of perceived exertion in your head, and then finish out the prescribed intervals. And then afterwards, we can kind of look at that and we can maybe understand why that workout wasn't as effective as we had hoped. But it's important, I think, to kind of develop the skill of resilience, that just because you're not feeling good doesn't mean you just bail on a workout. And I think there's some good reasons to utilize this system in workouts, and maybe for some people that works well. But in general, we also kind of wanted to start this conversation about power in your workouts and saying, I would much rather you utilize another system to kind of gauge your intensity of RPE, and then we'll check out the details later. But to complete that workout and to finish it, just like you're going to have good days on the bike in a race and bad days on the bike, you don't just bail and quit the race. So it's important to kind of develop that sense of kind of pushing through and fighting through. Next slide, please. So when we talk about this system of kind of prescribing intensity in workouts, the primary goal, or kind of the overall philosophy of this system, is that it's a scalable intensity prescription. So you can have workouts, and no matter who you apply it to, it's going to result in a pretty much identical intensity prescription for each different athlete. It's not suspect to heart rate variability. So if I gave one athlete and if I said, hey, you should do 20 minutes at a heart rate of about 160, there's going to be a lot of variability, in terms of how that might impact, a lot of variability in terms of the intensity of each of those riders. So that's really the beauty of bringing power into a workout, is that it's specific to your individual fitness level and it's scalable across athletes. So that's kind of the core concept of utilizing power in workouts, and how it helps to get a higher quality workout. So next slide, please. So how do you do this? So this has been kind of the standard across all different workout prescription for the past, probably five years or so. And that is using this system of % of FTP, or % of functional threshold power. So if you've gotten to this point in this series of presentations, you're probably familiar about the different methods to derive your FTP by doing a test outside or doing a test inside, and then kind of developing that benchmark for your fitness level. And then from that, then we utilize percentages of that threshold level to then prescribe different workout intensities. Now, there's a lot of debate in terms of this system, wasn't meant to be prescriptive. It's actually, supposed to be descriptive of, intensity levels. That's something that you can talk about another time. But for most people, this is kind of what's developed as the standard for prescribing intensity. And we're not going to get into each of these in a lot of specificity. You can check these out later. But in general, these percentages here are what has kind of been accepted for these different primarily aerobic intensity levels. So for the most part, this is a system that works really, really well. If I give Justin a workout and I say, hey, I want you to do 2 by 20 minutes at 96% of your FTP, and then I give another athlete a workout and say, do the same thing, 2 by 20 at 96% FTP, that's going to be roughly about the same intensity for both athletes. And that's one of the benefits of this, is that it's scalable to each athlete. It's specific to their individual fitness level. It works really well. But if we go to the next slide, please. So this kind of, breaks down this a little bit further in terms of what this looks like. So you might warm up for 75% FTP, 2 by 20s at 98% FTP. So it's a really simple, kind of concise way to deliver workout instructions. And like I said, it works really well up through, kind of through all of our aerobic intensities up through, about a threshold level. But if we go to the next slide, please. The problem with this system, or I would say the challenge with this system, is that it can get a little bit more complicated once we get over about 100, 105% of FTP. So some of you kind of, might be familiar with some of the other software systems out there that are already beginning to kind of look and see how we can more clearly define intervals for athletes over these intensities. But in general, a really simple way to do this is that you take a percentage of your peak power output over a target duration, generally under interval durations, kind of under 8 minutes, right? So as we begin to kind of go down in terms of go down the continuum of interval duration, it becomes individual differences between athletes become much more exposed, right? So if I said to Justin and I said, hey, I want you to do, I want you to do 5 minutes at 120% of FTP, that could very well be a very different effort than if I were to do those same intervals at 120% of FTP. And the primary reason for that is we begin to get into the differences in anaerobic energy production, which are much more variable across cyclists than the primary aerobic intensities of 100% to under 100% of threshold. So really simple system that we'll look at in the next slide is simply to, this picture looks more complex than it really is, but really all we're doing is, let's say if we're wanting to target a 3-minute interval, we're simply going to a mean maximal power curve, so a power curve of all best efforts, and then we're looking at what the best effort was at 3 minutes. So in this slide, we see that the best effort at 3 minutes was 433 watts. And then if we go down a little bit further, we're just simply taking about 94 to 98% of this best effort to develop this zone or this target that we would use for 3-minute intervals. So for this athlete at 3 minutes, we would want them executing intervals between 407 and 424 watts. So this is also variable between each person in terms of what is repeatable or what is really achievable from a interval perspective. And you would modify this based on kind of your success. So you might find that you go out and you do a 3-minute interval and you have really good repeatability around 98% pretty consistently. Someone else might find that they don't have as good of repeatability. But that's something for a further examination. But the important thing is to say that when you begin to do shorter, more intense intervals, the percent FTP system does not work as well. And this is not novel. Good coaches have been utilizing this type of a system or a variation on the system for a handful of years now. But it's something that's becoming more commonly used, in that for shorter intervals, usually in a duration of 8 minutes and under, it really requires a more specific individual look at prescribing that intensity if your goal is to really maximize your time and to really push yourself as much as you want. Now, for a lot of people, continuing to use the percent FTP system that Zwift uses and Training Peaks uses, it's still gonna work really well. So even for shorter durations, if you're utilizing percentages of FTP like 120%, 130%, 140%, those are still going to work really well. But if you really, really want to dial it in and make sure that you're using your time to maximum efficiency, utilizing a system like this will help to account for those different individual variances between each athlete. So next slide, please. So to kind of wrap this stuff up, right? So if we're talking about, again, how do we best apply power to get an optimal workout, or to help us develop the most effective types of workouts, number one is to learn that RPE continuum. So we have RPE, or unstructured workouts, on one side of the continuum, really focused interval work on the other side, and you should be utilizing that full continuum of workouts to not only help you, I would say, maintain long-term training focus and ability, but also to help you utilize a full language of training that's going to help you, not only have a more effective workout when you really need it, that's power based, but also really enjoy the bike in a more fun way when you don't need power. Second one, my personal philosophy is to not quit on workouts, just adjust. So there certainly are going to be some days where you know that something's wrong, or you have pain from an injury or something like that, you're going to quit a workout. But in general, I think it's better to finish the workout, switch your mind over to RPE, don't even look at power, and then afterwards you can look at it and try and make sense a little bit of where that workout went off the rails. But for the most part, don't quit, adjust. Understanding the limits to the percent FTP system. So it works really well up to about 105%, for longer aerobic and aerobic intensity aerobic intensities. Well, then under that, it might be worth it for you to more kind of finely tune your interval system to utilize specific best efforts off your power curve under kind of that 8-minute duration. So that's it for me. If you have any further questions, we can take this time to, if you have questions about how to use power in your workouts, or any kind of general training questions, you can fire them off here. You can also shoot me an email at nate@datadrivenathlete after the fact if you want to follow up on any further questions as well.
Okay, and I am back on the screen. Thank you so much, Nate. That's a really, really interesting topic, and I think something that doesn't necessarily get spoken to a lot about, where does percentage of FTP break down. So basically you're saying the threshold there is somewhere around the 8-minute interval mark. So if you're doing intervals less than 8 minutes, you're probably going to have very wide variability in terms of what athletes' response to that percentage of FTP workout is going to be. Is that accurate?
Yeah, exactly. And for some people, right, so the percent FTP system kind of exists on this bell curve, where for a lot of people, it could be that you find that those intensities work really well for you and they make sense. But if you're going out and let's say you're doing a workout like 5 by 4 minutes, let's say that's kind of your workout, and your intent is to target, to improve your maximal aerobic capacity. So let's say if you're going out and doing those intervals and you're saying, man, I really like these intervals because 4 minutes at 120% or whatever, however you set it up, but 4 minutes, it's not that hard for me. Like, it feels pretty good. Well, if that's your experience with these types of workouts, then I would say the system's not working for you. If you're doing, intervals that are targeted at improving your maximal aerobic capacity, and that 4 minutes feels reasonably comfortable to you, not working, right? It needs to be of higher intensity. So conversely, on the other side, if you're using this percent of FTP system and assuming that your threshold level is set appropriately, but if you're using that system and these just are not achievable levels for you at all, then again, I would, and you're rested and all those other types of variables that go into a good workout, then I would say, then looking at another system is probably going to be a better fit for you. So same thing, like, oftentimes previously I would prescribe intervals for athletes and they'd say, yeah, 1 minute, 1 minute's not that bad. Well, again, if 1 minute is not feeling all that intense for you, then I think you're going to be much better served at, more finely kind of tuning in on what your best effort is, assuming that you have a true best effort, kind of in your history, and then taking a repeatable percentage of that to really stress you maximally. So on one hand, it kind of sucks because you're going to be pushing yourself to a much greater degree, and the percent FTP system oftentimes kind of gives you this wiggle room to be like, I think I'm exercising at the appropriate intensity, but it's kind of nice because it's not that hard too. And when you zero in on kind of best efforts, it eliminates that slack in the system, which bad if you want to be a slacker, but good if you really want to maximize your time.
Interesting. So don't forget, people, if you do have questions, we will address them live here on the show. Let them fly in Facebook or in Discord as they come up. So maybe the way I would the tip I would give people, if let's say you've done, hey, special guest, Nate Jr.
Random special guest here. So I think Mom is sleeping on the job here. So this is my son. This is my son Charles, who wanted.
Hey, to say Charles, good morning, buddy. Hey, awesome. Glad to have him. So I think the tip I would give is, let's say you're doing a VO2 workout, because a lot of what we're talking about here relates to sprint and VO2 style workouts.
Sure.
If you're finding yourself in one of these categories where you're saying, look, I can crush this, I can do this workout all day long, you know, or you're saying, holy cow, that workout just destroys me, I can never complete it. What you should do is look at the duration, how long those intervals are, and go look up on your power chart. So Nate showed this in the slides. You've got your critical power curve. It basically says, what is the best effort you've ever done for all these different time windows? So if it's a 3-minute long VO2 max workout, go to 3 minutes, figure out what your absolute best is. Most software will even allow you to refer back to exactly what ride that is. So you'll know what was that, when did I do that hard 3-minute effort? You'll have a link to know what it should feel like. And then you can take that number that you get from your personal critical power curve and then look at the workout and say, is the workout asking me to do, you know, like 50% or 10% more than the best I've ever done? Like, yeah, you might not even be able to do it. Or is it asking you to do only 70% of your best? Well, no wonder it's easy. It's not even getting close to your top. So
yeah,
in this system,
well, and
go ahead, Nate. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, and obviously, as you're describing it, you know, Justin, this is a system that takes more legwork. And what my assumption will be is that all of the training platforms eventually will do this legwork for athletes. So I don't know how much longer it's going to take. You know, there's already, you know, one training platform, Sufferfest, that is kind of, you know, they've made this their shift to utilize to basically the process that we're describing for the software to handle that. And I'm sure that Training Peaks is gonna go that route as well. But for now, it takes a little bit of legwork to set that up, and it might be that legwork just, you know, maximizing your intervals in that capacity might just not really make sense for you, and that's okay. I don't want to give off the false impression or kind of overemphasize that these small differences are going to produce huge changes. So certainly does take some legwork, but just as you described, if you're noticing these inconsistencies, and let's say you're doing workouts on Zwift and they're giving you, you know, percent FTP targets, and they're not really, you know, not really jiving with what it feels like that intensity should be, you know, that procedure like you're describing, Justin, to go back, see that best effort, and then to kind of back calculate, you know, where you're doing that, is one that I think can be really helpful if you're wanting to maximize, you know, those. I mean, and in my mind, if you're doing VO2 max intervals, you might as well do them really well, right? So, you know, there's an article on Data Driven Athlete all about VO2 max, and you can go there in the search bar and just click VO2 max. But if, you know, what the research shows is that there's a lot of different ways to improve your VO2 max. You can do it by lower intensity riding, but if you've been training for a long time and if you're really fit, to improve your VO2 max, you're gonna have to go really, really hard. I mean, that's the bottom line. And if you're setting aside that time to do a workout like that, you might as well make sure that it's really pushing you to a maximal level, and that you're not kind of hiding in between maybe some of the inconsistency or some of the variance in the percent FTP system.
Interesting. We do have a question on the live stream, which I think actually is a great stepping point from this conversation. He says, Nate, do you ever use erg mode with athletes? And I think this thought actually came to my mind about, okay, we just talked about how sometimes you need to transition away from intervals, you know, instead of just bailing on the whole thing, switching to RPE. Erg throws a little bit of a wrench in there. Also, you know, workouts being built just based on percentage of FTP, not necessarily on this other method we're talking about. So I think the question of erg is definitely well fit. So I want to I'll throw it to you to answer that now that I've given you some time to formulate your thoughts.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I have, I'd say in general, when it comes to erg mode, that's something that I leave up to an athlete. So some athletes, they really like that controlled nature of erg mode where they can just start the workout. You know, all of our workouts, you know, sync through to Training Peaks. So they just hop on the trainer, they just press start, and then erg mode leads them through that. So for some athletes, they prefer kind of watching something on TV that's not related maybe necessarily to the workout. And then erg mode can just kind of force them into doing the workout. And they prefer that. Other athletes, they feel really restricted by erg mode. So I'd say whatever you like to do, I think is probably the best way to go. But in terms of erg mode, so they've improved their functionality in this to where you can be in erg mode and then you can still kind of hit like plus 10%, and kind of increase the intensity with that. So if you like erg mode, then I would say utilize that feature to where if you're utilizing the percent FTP targets, and you're doing them, especially if you're near the end of a workout and you're like, man, I still got some more in the tank here, then you can still kind of adjust that a little bit and add some more intensity. But in general, I would say if you like erg mode and that helps you, you know, more consistently complete workouts, I think it's a great option. For me personally, I think the OCD part of me, I love looking at those workouts and Training Peaks. You know, it's like you open it up and I'm like, oh, that's so beautiful. It's just, you know, it's just so dialed. It's a weird thing, you know. As many of them that I've seen, I still pop it open and I'm like, oh, that's just beautiful. So not, you know, I could never make a case that that's a better quality workout or that you're getting a better benefit by, you know, by dialing it into the exact watt every single. So if you like it better, I'd say go with it. It's a good option.
So maybe I don't know, maybe some people in the stream who don't know what erg mode is, I'd kind of jumped into that. So erg is, I'm not sure what the 3-letter acronym stands for, ERG, but what it is, you have a smart trainer that can electronically control its resistance. And so when your workout is calling for, say, 200 watts, it will guarantee that you're holding 200 watts. And if you spin your legs really fast, it'll actually decrease the resistance to keep the wattage consistent. Or if you slow your legs down, it'll increase the resistance, actually make it really hard to push. We call that the erg death spiral. You slow your cadence down, you can get to a point where you come to a halt. But do you know what the ERG stands for, Nate?
Yeah, so erg is short for ergometer. So its history is kind of in exercise physiology labs where you know, those machines were, you know, are called ergometers, and they basically hold you to a specific workload. So so that's kind of it's adapting that kind of old school approach to some of those, and it's a great thing if you want to say, hey, I want to keep an athlete, you know, right here, or we're doing a test and we want to maintain, you know, this amount of wattage. It's a great way to kind of, you know, force somebody into that. But for the very reason you described, I don't like, you know, I don't like erg mode. I don't like that kind of boxed in feeling of like, I like to be able to adjust my cadence and but for other people, if it works, it's a really, really cool way to kind of force compliance on a workout. And if you like that, it's an awesome option. It works really well.
Awesome. Well, I think I'm going to transition in a little bit to wrapping up the show. We got a few things to announce. I want to thank Nate for his time. He's been so gracious and such a great presenter. I wish we could have you every week because I'm sure all of our viewers agree that you give such a better perspective than I do. I really appreciate
Charles,
that.
My son Charles will be expecting some royalty checks from his scheduled appearance.
Okay. We've got a GoFundMe for what's his favorite cereal?
Charles doesn't eat cereal, actually.
Oh, wow.
It's high protein breakfast, eggs.
Wow, this must, okay. High protein it is, okay. Well, we've got a GoFundMe to send some chickens to Nate's residence so they can have eggs all the time.
We would love that here.
So a couple things I want to announce. So if you want to catch up on previous episodes of the show, we do have a podcast we launched. Search with your favorite podcast platform and search for The Endurance Lab, and you will find these episodes get rolled into there, and they come out usually within a day, sometimes even hours of when we complete here. Also, we are launching a forum this week where we can have discussions outside the show time. Currently, we've got some posts going on there about when we release episodes. You can see them there, comment on them. We'll also be doing some backside chatter as far as like, hey, what do you guys want to see on the channel? What are some topics you're interested in? Get some feedback on how to direct the show, how to guide it. So that's at discuss.endurancelab.fit. And so we will actually post a link to that in the show notes. That'll be where the forum is. There's a subcategory there for What's Up with Power. So when I get a chance, when I'm not spinning my legs and broadcasting, I'll type that into the chat for everyone. You can go sign up there and join the conversation. And yeah, with that, we will wrap up the show. Say thank you to everyone for coming. Don't forget, there's lots of great content coming on the show later today. Skills and Drills with Ian Murray, where you've got interactive group ride teaching you pack dynamics, racing skills, great stuff. So check it out. And I hope you have a wonderful day, and we will catch you next time.